She left me for being poor 30 minutes before I learned I was worth $500 million. I was lying under a rusted Ford pickup in my garage outside Dallas, one hand wrapped around a wrench, the other smeared with oil up to the wrist, when Claire Mercer walked in wearing the blue coat I had bought her 3 Christmases ago. The coat still looked expensive. I did not. The concrete floor was cold against my back. The garage smelled like gasoline, metal dust, and the cheap coffee I had reheated twice, and the old radio on the shelf kept fading between country music and static. Owen's toy fire truck sat near the workbench where he had left it that morning, one plastic wheel missing, waiting for me to fix it after dinner. That was my life back then. Broken things came to me, and I tried to make them work again. Trucks, lawn mowers, unpaid bills, tired marriages. I slid out from under the pickup when I saw Claire standing there, her suitcase beside her, one hand gripping a manila envelope. She did not look sad. That was the first thing I noticed. Not angry either. Just finished. Like she had already packed her heart before she packed her clothes. "Daniel," she said, using my name the way people use a period at the end of a sentence. I sat up, wiping my hands on a rag. "What is going on?" She looked around the garage with the kind of disgust that does not need words. The cracked shelves, the second-hand tools, the cardboard box of invoices I had not had the courage to open yet, the pickup I was fixing for a neighbor because the extra $200 would help cover Owen's dentist bill. Then she dropped the envelope on my chest. Divorce papers slid halfway out when they hit my shirt, clean white pages against oil-stained cotton. "I did not marry you to die poor," she said. Outside, headlights glowed through the garage window. A black SUV idled at the curb, polished and quiet, the kind of vehicle that looked like it had never carried groceries from a discount store or a kid's muddy baseball cleats. Preston Vale sat behind the wheel, one arm resting near the window, not looking at me directly. Men like him never did when someone else was taking the risk for them. I looked back at Claire. For a second, I wanted to say everything at once. I wanted to tell her about the 14-hour days, the jobs I took when my back hurt, the nights I skipped dinner so Owen could have new shoes, the way I had been trying to hold a roof over our heads with hands that never stayed clean. But words do strange things when a person has already decided your life is too small for them. They shrink in your mouth. "Owen is asleep," I said. It was the only thing that came out. Her face flickered, but only for a moment. "He will be better off when I have stability," she said. Stability. The word landed harder than the papers. I had spent 8 years trying to be exactly that, and somehow she had mistaken quiet sacrifice for failure. She turned toward the driveway, suitcase wheels clicking over the garage floor. At the door, she paused without turning around. "Do not make this harder than it has to be." Then she left. The SUV door closed softly. The engine pulled away from the curb like money leaving a poor neighborhood. I stood there in the garage with divorce papers in one hand and an oil rag in the other, listening until the street went silent. Inside the house, Owen coughed in his sleep. That small sound kept me from falling apart. I walked to his room, stood in the doorway, and watched my 7-year-old son sleeping with one arm around a stuffed dinosaur and one sock halfway off his foot. He still trusted the world because nobody had taught him otherwise yet. I did not wake him. I did not call Claire. I did not chase the SUV. I went back to the garage, picked up the mail from the workbench, and found an envelope from Bennett and Shaw Legal Services. I almost tossed it onto the pile with the bills. Then I saw my uncle's name. Arthur Mercer. My hands were still shaking when I opened it. The letter inside was short, formal, and impossible. Arthur had passed 2 weeks earlier in Montana. He had named me the primary beneficiary of a private trust, energy holdings, land assets, and investment accounts estimated at $500 million. I read the number 3 times. 500 million. The garage did not change. The pickup still leaked oil. The radio still hissed. The divorce papers still sat on the bench where Claire had left them. But the world had tilted so quietly that only I could hear it move. If she had waited 30 minutes, she would have met a different future. Instead, she had shown me exactly who she was before the money had a chance to confuse the truth. I read that letter until the words stopped looking like English. $500 million does not enter a garage quietly, not really. It comes in like a second weather system, pressing against every wall, every unpaid invoice, every tired breath you have been holding for years. But I did not shout. I did not laugh. I did not run into the street waving the paper like a fool trying to prove a woman wrong after she had already chosen to leave. I folded the letter once, then twice, and set it beside the divorce papers on the workbench. Two futures lay there under the same flickering fluorescent light. One had Claire's signature line waiting at the bottom. The other had my Uncle Arthur's name at the top. I stood between them with oil under my fingernails and my son asleep down the hall, and for the first time that night, my chest stopped shaking. Not because the pain was gone. Pain does not leave because money arrives. It just gets quieter when clarity walks in. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of tap water because it was the only normal thing I could think to do. The house looked smaller than it had an hour earlier. Not worse. Just honest. The chipped cabinet near the sink. The calendar with Owen's school picture day circled in red. The stack of grocery coupons Claire used to mock, but still used when she thought I was not looking. Our life was not glamorous, but it had been real to me. I had believed that mattered. Maybe that was my mistake. I stood in the doorway of Owen's room again. He had rolled onto his side, his stuffed dinosaur tucked under his chin. 7 years old, missing one front tooth. Still young enough to think parents leaving the house always came back before morning. I sat on the edge of his bed without waking him and listened to him breathe. That sound became my anchor. Not the money, not the letter. Him. Because if I made one wrong move now, if I let pride drive instead of purpose, he would pay for a fight he never asked for. I went back to the garage, picked up my phone, and hovered over Claire's name. One tap, and I could have changed everything. I could have told her what she had walked away from. I could have watched her turn that SUV around before Preston even reached the highway. I could have bought myself a wife for the price of a phone call. My thumb stayed still. That sentence hit me harder than the number in the letter. Bought myself a wife. I lowered the phone. If Claire came back because I was rich, then she would not be coming back to me. She would be coming back to the version of me she finally found useful. I had been poor enough to be rejected. I would not become rich enough to be used. At 6 the next morning, I called Richard Bennett. His voice was calm, polished, and careful. The voice of a man used to delivering life-changing news to people sitting at kitchen tables they could barely afford. He confirmed every word. Arthur Mercer had spent 40 years building energy holdings across Texas, Montana, and North Dakota. He had no children, no surviving spouse, and apparently more faith in me than I ever knew. The trust was real. The valuation was real. The responsibility was real. There will be steps, Richard said. Security, tax planning, custody considerations, privacy, asset protection. I strongly advised discretion. I looked at the divorce papers beside the sink, where I had moved them sometime before dawn without remembering why. Discretion will not be a problem, I said. Richard paused. There is one more thing. Your uncle left a personal note. He read it slowly, and each word seemed to settle deeper than the money ever could. Do not let money turn you into the people who only respect money. I closed my eyes. Arthur had always been quiet. A man of few phone calls, fewer visits, and birthday cards with $20 bills folded inside. I never knew he was testing the world around me from a distance. Maybe he had seen more than I thought. Maybe he knew a man's character is easiest to measure before anyone calls him successful. When the call ended, morning light had started leaking through the blinds. Owen came into the kitchen rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up on one side, asking where his mother was. I knelt in front of him, my knees stiff from the garage floor, and chose the first truth of my new life carefully. Mom had to leave for a while, I said. His face folded in confusion. Did I do something? That question broke what the divorce papers had not. I pulled him close, steady enough not to scare him, soft enough to let him feel safe. No, buddy. Never. This is grown-up stuff. You are loved. That does not change. Over his shoulder, I could see the letter from Bennett and Shaw on the counter. $500 million waited there quietly. But in my arms was the only inheritance that mattered enough to shape the man I would become. Daniel Mercer spent the morning in quiet reflection, walking through the garage where he had spent years fixing trucks, mowing lawns, and patching broken appliances, remembering how every small act had kept his family afloat. The smell of motor oil, sawdust, and concrete reminded him of the life that had once defined him, a life of work, patience, and quiet sacrifice that Claire Mercer had come to see as insufficient. A life he now realized had prepared him for what was to come, he thought. About the years before the inheritance, when weekends were spent repairing fences instead of visiting fancy brunches, when his paychecks went to groceries and school supplies instead of cocktails and designer dresses, and how those choices had shaped Owen Mercer into a boy who trusted people because he had always seen the example of dependability. Daniel made a deliberate decision not to call Claire, not to flaunt the inheritance, because he understood that some truths are revealed only through action and time, not through words or displays. He sat at the kitchen table with the sunlight slanting through the blinds, the divorce papers from Claire and the letter from Arthur Mercer placed neatly before him, feeling the gravity of both documents equally as they represented the divergent paths his life could take, one of abandonment and the other of unexpected fortune, both demanding decisions and clarity. He moved through the house methodically, checking on Owen's homework, preparing breakfast, folding laundry, and attending to small maintenance tasks. The routine grounding him while his mind processed the sudden shift in circumstances and the responsibility the inheritance now carried. Daniel considered how he would use the trust to secure his son's future, invest wisely, and maintain his dignity without altering the core values that had defined him for so long, understanding that wealth could amplify character just as easily as it could mask flaws. And he was determined to let it amplify the man he had always been rather than change him into someone unrecognizable. He reflected on the quiet evenings with Claire when she complained about small inconveniences, not realizing that those inconveniences had built resilience, patience, and foresight, all of which were now crucial for managing a life that included financial power and societal attention. By midday, Daniel had organized the documents, created a plan for his first meetings with financial advisors, and drafted a careful schedule for informing trusted associates, balancing discretion with the need for action, all while maintaining the composure that had carried him through years of being undervalued and misunderstood. He paused to watch Owen play in the yard, seeing how his son's curiosity and confidence had grown despite the instability caused by Claire's departure, and he recognized that nurturing these qualities was far more important than flaunting money or proving a point, a lesson that Arthur Mercer's note had quietly reinforced. The morning passed with measured steps and quiet reflection, each task, each thought reinforcing Daniel's commitment to integrity, patience, and careful management of the inheritance, ensuring that when the world became aware of his fortune, it would encounter not a man changed by money but a man whose worth had been defined long before any wealth arrived, ready to move forward with a calm certainty that only years of endurance and careful observation could cultivate. By late afternoon, the house had settled into the kind of quiet that comes after something leaves and does not come back. Owen was in the living room with a bowl of macaroni and cheese, watching cartoons at low volume, while I stood at the kitchen counter reading Arthur's note for the 10th time. Do not let money turn you into the people who only respect money. The sentence felt less like advice and more like a test. Outside the window, the Dallas sky had turned the color of faded brass, and the neighbor's sprinkler clicked in steady circles across a yellowing lawn. Nothing looked different enough for what had happened. The same cracked driveway, the same mailbox leaning slightly to the right, the same garage door that groaned every time it lifted. But inside me, something had shifted. Not pride, not revenge, direction. Richard Bennett called again at 5:15 and walked me through the first steps with the patience of a man guiding someone across thin ice. Privacy protections, temporary advisors, custody preparation, a separate account under legal supervision. Nothing flashy, nothing careless. You are going to have people appear very quickly once this becomes visible, he said. I looked toward the living room, where Owen laughed at something on television, the sound small and bright. Then let us make sure it does not become visible until my son is protected. Richard paused, then said, That is the right answer. After the call, I opened the refrigerator and found the casserole Claire had made 2 nights earlier, covered in foil, untouched since she left. I took it out, reheated enough for Owen, and stood there while the microwave hummed, remembering the woman Claire used to be. There had been a time when she sat on the garage steps with lemonade while I worked, her bare feet dusty, her smile easy, telling me she loved that I could fix anything. Back then, she saw grease on my hands as proof that I would never let our life fall apart. Somewhere along the way, the same grease became embarrassment. My work boots by the door became evidence against me. My old truck became a symbol she did not want parked near the life she imagined. Preston Vale did not create that hunger in her. He only gave it a polished shape. He wore tailored jackets, drove cars that smelled like leather and credit, spoke about investments over dinners he probably expensed to someone else, and made Claire feel like she had been waiting in the wrong life. I could hate him if I wanted to. It would be easy. But the truth was quieter than hate. Preston had not taken my wife. He had only revealed what she was willing to trade for the appearance of winning. That evening, after Owen fell asleep with his school library book open on his chest, I sat at the kitchen table and signed the first set of documents Richard had sent electronically. I did not sign the divorce papers yet, not because I was unsure, but because I had learned in one long night that timing matters. Claire had made her decision when she thought I had nothing. The court would learn that. The custody plan would reflect it. And my son would never be used as a suitcase she could pick up when the richer road turned out to be rough. At 8:30, Claire texted for the first time. It was not an apology. It was not concern for Owen. It was a simple line that told me everything I needed to know. I hope you will not make this ugly. I looked at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I typed one answer, deleted it, and put the phone face down. Some people call silence weakness because they have never been strong enough to sit inside it. I washed Owen's plate, fixed the loose wheel on his toy fire truck, and placed it beside his bed where he would see it in the morning. That was the first thing I repaired after becoming rich. Not a reputation, not a marriage. A little red truck for a boy who needed proof that some things still came back whole. The next morning began before sunrise, not because I had slept well, but because sleep had become a door my mind refused to walk through. Owen was still asleep when I made coffee, packed his lunch, and stood at the kitchen sink watching the first pale line of daylight stretch over the rooftops. The letter from Bennett and Shaw sat in a folder now, hidden inside the drawer where Claire used to keep birthday candles and takeout menus. $500 million, tucked between ordinary things. That felt right somehow. Money should not be the loudest object in a house where a child was still trying to understand why his mother had not come home. By 8, I dropped Owen at school. He climbed out of the truck with his backpack too big for his shoulders and his repaired fire truck tucked under one arm because he wanted to show his teacher. Before he closed the door, he looked back and asked, "Is Mom coming to dinner?" I kept both hands on the steering wheel and gave him the safest truth I had. "Not tonight, buddy, but I will be there." He nodded, trying to be brave in the way children do when they sense adults are already carrying too much. When he walked through the school doors, I sat in the pickup for a full minute with the engine running, letting that sentence settle in me. I will be there. It was not much, but it was a promise I could keep. At 10, I met Richard Bennett in a private conference room downtown, 20 floors above Dallas traffic. The table was polished enough to reflect my old work jacket, and for the first time in my life, I felt underdressed in a room where everyone was being paid to listen to me. Richard did not make me feel small. He spread the documents out like a map and explained the trust, the energy holdings, the land in Montana, the investment accounts, the tax exposure, the security risks, and the custody strategy. Numbers moved across the page that should have made my heart race, but all I could think about was Owen's question at drop-off. Richard must have seen it on my face because he stopped midway through a sentence and said, "Daniel, wealth does not simplify grief. It only gives you more tools." I looked at the folder in front of me. Then the first tool is privacy. He nodded. We agreed on quiet steps. No announcements. No luxury purchases. No sudden mansion that would turn my son's life into a rumor at school. Debts would be cleared through channels that did not draw attention. The garage lease would be handled. My old clients would be transferred respectfully. Owen would stay in his school until I knew what stability looked like. That was the first real decision I made as a rich man. Not what car to buy, not what house to show off. How little disruption my child would feel. Richard then slid one final document across the table. Your uncle also owned a failing logistics yard outside Fort Worth. Most heirs would sell it. Arthur noted that you might understand its value. I stared at the old property photos clipped inside the file. Rusted bays, empty trailers, weeds pushing through cracked asphalt. To most people, it probably looked like another broken thing. To me, it looked familiar. Something discarded. Something underestimated. Something that might run again if the right hand stopped treating it like trash. Do not sell it yet, I said. Richard's eyebrows lifted slightly. You want to inspect it? I looked at the photo of the main gate hanging crooked on its hinges. I want to rebuild it. By noon, I was back in my truck, driving west under a wide Texas sky, the city thinning behind me, the highway opening ahead like a sentence I had not finished writing. Claire called once. I let it go to voicemail. Then she texted, "Preston says we should keep communication civil." I read it at a red light and almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because the world had become so clear it almost hurt. Preston had opinions now. Of course he did. Men who wait in idling sport utility vehicles always have opinions after someone else signs the papers. I put the phone face down and kept driving. The logistics yard stood behind a chain-link fence near a service road, sunburned and quiet, with a faded sign that still carried the Mercer name. I stepped out, boots crunching over gravel, and breathed in dust, diesel, and possibility. For the first time since Claire left, I felt something other than loss. Not happiness. Not yet. Purpose. The kind that starts small, like a repaired toy truck on a boy's nightstand, then grows into something large enough to carry both of you forward. 5 years had passed since the divorce papers had hit the garage floor, and Daniel Mercer stood on the porch of his newly built ranch outside Fort Worth, watching Owen ride his bicycle along the white fence that bordered the property. The logistics yard he had inherited was now a hub of activity, trucks moving with precision, solar panels glinting in the afternoon sun, and employees waving as they passed, unaware that the man in the flannel shirt overseeing them had once been the same person, whose hands had been covered in oil, trying to keep a small family afloat. Daniel's life had transformed not because he flaunted wealth, but because he had chosen to use it carefully, rebuilding the yard, investing in renewable energy, and ensuring Owen had the stability he needed, while still maintaining the discipline and patience he had learned from years of hard work and obscurity. The house behind him was modest yet spacious, a combination of modern efficiency and rustic charm, with every room filled with memories of perseverance rather than extravagance, and each detail planned so Owen could grow up seeing responsibility and integrity valued above showy displays. Daniel watched his son navigate the gravel path, laughing when the repaired fire truck hit a bump, and realized that this son had not only survived the early chaos but thrived because Daniel had maintained consistency, love, and boundaries in spite of the upheaval caused by Claire Mercer's departure. The inheritance had given him resources, but it was the careful, deliberate choices that created a life in which his child could feel safe and proud. Learning that success is measured not by what others see, but by what one does to protect and nurture those who depend on you. Daniel reflected on the quiet mornings spent going over financial reports, the afternoons inspecting the logistics yard, and the evenings reading to Owen by the fireplace, each moment reinforcing that wealth is a tool, not a trophy, and that character built in adversity could never be purchased, only preserved. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples, Daniel knew that Claire might hear of his success through society pages, business publications, or mutual acquaintances, but he did not seek her acknowledgement, nor did he need her validation, for his life and Owen's life were complete in ways no money could amplify or diminish. He allowed himself a small smile as he thought of the woman who had walked away, understanding that her choices and her absence had contributed to the very discipline, focus, and determination that had created this life, a life in which he could finally stand tall, confident in the knowledge that he had preserved his son's happiness and his own integrity, building a foundation that would endure long after any headline or gossip, and realizing that true power lies in the quiet mastery of one's own decisions, the unwavering commitment to personal values, and the ability to create security and opportunity for those we love most. Claire Mercer learned about Daniel's new life from a glossy business magazine in the waiting area of a credit counseling office in Dallas. That was the detail that would have embarrassed her most 5 years earlier, not the debt counselor's clipboard, not the overdue notices folded in her purse, not the fact that her apartment lease had 60 days left and no clear way to renew it, but being seen reading about the man she had left while sitting under fluorescent lights with a paper cup of stale coffee in her hand. The headline did not scream. That made it worse. It was calm, respectful, almost understated, describing Daniel Mercer as the quiet force behind a regional logistics expansion and a renewable energy investment network across 7 states. There was a photograph of him standing near a line of white trucks at a Fort Worth yard, wearing a dark jacket over a flannel shirt, his hair touched with silver, his face older but steadier, the kind of man people listened to before he finished speaking. Claire held the magazine so tightly the corner bent under her thumb. For a moment, the office sounds faded. The copier warming up, the receptionist answering calls, a child tapping sneakers against a chair. All she could hear was her own sentence from 5 years ago, sharp and proud in a garage that smelled like oil. She had not married him to die poor. The memory returned without mercy. The concrete floor, the old pickup, the divorce papers sliding across his shirt. Preston Vale waiting outside in that black sport utility vehicle, looking like escape wrapped in leather seats. Claire had believed she was choosing a higher life. She had believed Preston's watches, rooftop reservations, and talk of investment circles meant security. What she had chosen was a man who rented confidence by the month. Preston's money had always moved faster than his character. First came delayed payments. Then came excuses about market timing. Then came credit cards, private loans, a condo with a view they could not afford, and friends who disappeared as soon as the dinners stopped being paid for. By year 3, the sport utility vehicle was gone. By year 4, Preston was calling everything a temporary setback. By year 5, he left a note on the kitchen counter saying he needed space to rebuild, which was a polished way of saying he had found someone else to believe him. Claire did not cry when he left. Not at first. There are disappointments too obvious to deserve tears. But seeing Daniel in that magazine broke something different. He had not become rich in the loud way she once admired. He had become solid, untouchable, useful to people, respected by people who did not care what kind of watch he wore. That hurt because it proved the thing she had misread from the beginning. Daniel had never been empty. He had been unfinished in a world that rewards shine before structure. The counselor called her name, and Claire stood with the magazine still in her hand. "Ma'am," the receptionist said gently, "that belongs here." Claire looked down, embarrassed, and placed it back on the table as if returning evidence. That evening, she sat in her small apartment with boxes stacked against one wall and opened her laptop. She searched Daniel Mercer Fort Worth Ranch. Then Owen Mercer. Her son's name appeared in a local school article about a middle school science competition, smiling beside Daniel, taller now, his face carrying traces of the boy she had left and the young man she had missed. Claire touched the screen with 2 fingers before catching herself. 5 years is a long time when you count it in birthdays. It is even longer when you count it in absences. She had sent cards at first, then fewer. Calls became awkward. Owen became polite. Daniel never blocked her, never poisoned him against her, never made a scene. He simply raised their son in the spaces she abandoned. Claire closed the laptop and looked around the apartment. A half-empty suitcase, a stack of bills, a framed photo from a rooftop dinner with Preston, both of them smiling under lights paid for with money that was already running out. For the first time, she understood that Daniel's old garage had been poor only in appearance. Her new life had been poor in everything that mattered. The next morning, with no plan except desperation dressed as courage, Claire packed one suitcase, sold a bracelet she once thought proved she had upgraded, and bought a bus ticket toward Fort Worth. She told herself she was going to see Owen. That was partly true, but underneath that truth was another one, smaller and more shameful. She wanted to know if the gate she had walked away from could still open. The bus dropped Claire at a small station west of Fort Worth just as a soft rain began to move across the road in silver lines. She stood under the awning with one suitcase beside her, wearing the same blue coat Daniel had bought years ago, though now the cuffs were worn and one button did not match the others. For a moment, she almost turned around. It was easier to imagine apology from a distance. Up close, apology had a gate, a driveway, a house, a son with older eyes, and a man who no longer needed the version of her that had left. She called a rideshare because she could not bring herself to call Daniel first. The driver took her past open fields, long fences, and stretches of land that seemed too wide for the life she had been living. When the ranch came into view, Claire forgot to breathe. White fencing ran along the road in clean lines. The main gate carried the Mercer name in black iron, simple, not showy, which somehow made it feel even farther beyond her reach. Beyond it, the house sat low and warm against the gray afternoon, with trucks moving in the distance near a private service road and solar panels catching what little light the clouds allowed. This was not the loud wealth Preston had pretended to have. This was rooted wealth. Quiet wealth. Wealth that had learned how to stand without asking to be admired. The driver stopped at the gate. Claire paid, stepped out into the rain, and stood there with her suitcase handle slick under her palm. There was an intercom on a stone post. Her finger hovered before she pressed it. A woman's voice answered, professional and calm. Mercer residence. Claire swallowed. This is Claire Mercer. I need to speak with Daniel. The silence that followed was short, but it felt earned. Please wait. Claire looked through the gate at the long driveway. She imagined Owen riding his bike there, imagined birthdays she had missed, school mornings she had not helped with, fevers she had not checked, ordinary days she had treated like they would wait for her. Ordinary days do not wait. They become childhood. They become memory. They become proof of who stayed. The gate opened slowly. No drama. No anger. Just an electric hum and a path she was no longer sure she deserved to take. Daniel was waiting on the front porch when the car sent for her rolled up the driveway. He wore dark jeans, a gray sweater, and work boots with dust still on them, as if money had changed the size of his land but not the way he stood on it. His hair had more silver than the magazine showed. His face was calm, not soft, not cruel, just protected. Claire stepped out, clutching her suitcase handle. Daniel, she said. His name sounded different here, on his land, in the life he had built without asking her permission. He nodded once. Claire. Not honey. Not angry. Just Claire. That alone told her how far she had traveled and how late she had arrived. Can I see Owen? She asked, because it was the safest truth to lead with. Daniel looked toward the house. He is at practice. He knows you asked to come. He said he will decide when he gets back. The words were gentle, but they took the breath from her. He will decide. Not Daniel keeping her out. Not Daniel poisoning him. Owen deciding for himself. That was fair, and fairness can feel colder than punishment when you have lived on excuses. Daniel opened the front door. You can wait inside. Claire entered the house and stopped almost immediately. The walls were filled with photographs. Owen at 9, holding a fishing pole beside Daniel. Owen at 10, missing another tooth, wearing a science fair ribbon. Owen at 11, muddy from a soccer game. Owen at 12, standing beside the repaired red fire truck on a shelf in the background, preserved like a tiny monument. Claire walked closer to the photos, and her hand rose before she stopped herself. He got so tall, she whispered. Daniel stood a few feet behind her. Children do that. No accusation. No raised voice. Just a fact big enough to break her. She turned, tears already gathering. I made mistakes. Daniel's eyes stayed steady. Yes. She nodded quickly, as if agreeing fast enough could soften the truth. Preston left. Everything fell apart. I know that is not your problem. I know I do not deserve to walk in here and ask for anything, but I want to fix what I can. I want my family back. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, and in that silence she saw the garage again, the oil on his shirt, the papers on his chest, the black SUV idling at the curb. She had thought she was leaving poverty. What she had really left was loyalty before it became visible. You can work on being Owen's mother, he said. If he wants that, I will not stand in the way. Claire closed her eyes, relief and pain mixing so tightly she could not separate them. Then Daniel added, quietly, but you are not coming back as my wife. The sentence did not slam. It settled, like a gate closing without sound. Claire opened her eyes. Daniel, please. He shook his head once. I forgave you a long time ago. That is why I can speak to you calmly. But forgiveness is not an invitation to return to the place you abandoned. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, Claire stood surrounded by 5 years of photographs she could not enter, realizing that the life she wanted back had not been waiting at the gate. It had grown without her. Claire stood in the Mercer living room, hands clasped, looking at the photos of Owen over the past 5 years, realizing that forgiveness was not a magic key to the past she had abandoned. Daniel sat across from her in a simple chair, calm and measured, letting her see the sun they shared, confident and happy, without anger or resentment, showing that life could continue without her control, but with her presence guided by boundaries. He spoke softly, reminding her that she could rebuild a relationship with Owen, but the role of wife was no longer hers to reclaim. and the power of choice rested in the child she had left behind, a lesson she had learned too late about consequences and respect. Claire's eyes filled with tears as she acknowledged the years she had missed, the decisions she could not undo, and the realization that redemption required patience, honesty, and the willingness to accept limits set by those she had wronged. Daniel invited her to sit closer to Owen's things, to see the school projects, awards, and toys that had been cared for in her absence, demonstrating through tangible evidence how her son had grown under guidance and love without her interference, illustrating that responsible action speaks louder than regret or pleading. The afternoon sun filtered through large windows, casting long shadows and highlighting the calm order of the house, symbolizing the balance Daniel had achieved between wealth, responsibility, and emotional integrity, a contrast to the chaotic decisions Claire had made in the past, emphasizing the importance of values over appearances. As she watched Daniel maintain composure and kindness, Claire recognized that true respect and trust are earned over time and cannot be demanded, and she reflected on her own mistakes and the personal growth required to genuinely reconnect with her child. The scene closed with Daniel walking to the kitchen to make tea for them both, Owen arriving home soon after, and Claire observing silently, letting the child's comfort and routine lead her understanding of her place, reinforcing the idea that meaningful relationships require patience, consistent effort, and adherence to principles rather than superficial attempts to regain lost positions. The narrative concluded by inviting the audience to consider their own choices and the effects of their actions on others, posing the question, what would you do if faced with a similar situation? And encouraging viewers to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories that explore personal growth, emotional resilience, and the consequences of decisions within family dynamics, blending drama with life lessons in a way that resonates and teaches through realistic scenarios, leaving the audience reflecting on trust, responsibility, and the enduring impact of integrity.